live and work on Wurundjeri land within the great Kulin Nation. It's customary in Australia to open not only official proceedings, but also gatherings of community with an acknowledgement of country. And today I'd like to pay my respects to elders and traditional owners of this land, and elders past and present. And in doing so, acknowledge any Indigenous or First Nations people that are with us here today. I'd also like to thank Amy and Neil and Music Canada for inviting me to Toronto and showing me such generosity over the last few days. So here begins my story. I met my partner Quincy McLean in the early 80s, just before I dropped out of uni. He was a fledgling art student and I was an impressionable punk teenager. We were two bored kids, desperate to escape the drudgery of top 40 dinosaur rock and suburban life. So we converged on the seaside town of St Kilda, a place of faded grandeur and crumbling mansions, a place where sailors, bikies, prostitutes, criminals, rich kids, poor kids, junkies, artists were all the central characters to the stories that were written in song of the time, and the first wave of punk and post-punk hit Melbourne. We cut our teeth on the sticky, floored band rooms, drenched with the stench of old beer and sweat, and a scene where everyone knew each other not only by name, but by reputation. So fast forward, we come to 2010, and one of those places on the other side of Melbourne is the Tote, where Quincy's first ever punk band, Scrap Museum, played their first ever gig in 1982, and here we are, 2010, and the Tote is under threat of closure. So cue video.
You know, it's a little bit mouldy and a little bit festering, but that culture is good things.
Not everyone wants to listen to Britney Spears.
All live music venues are now classified as high risk for violence and face higher licensing fees and extra security costs.
Liquor licensing has put high-risk conditions on the Tote.
I can't keep the Tote open under the high-risk conditions, fighting liquor licensing at VCAT.
And that's when Quincy started the mantra of someone's got to do something, someone's got to do something.
This is our goddamn culture. We've got to fight it. It's just not good enough.
From me up there, you will lose seats on me. You will lose seats on me.
Rock grunge. So here we are, it's 2010, it's an election year, and I'll start this section with the title Unintended Consequences. The popular Labor state government are at the end of 12 years in power, so historically no party has ever gone on to achieve a fourth term over in Victoria, and the headlines in Rupert Murdoch's papers read blood and booze on the streets. The public is outraged. Alcohol-fueled violence and late-night drinking has the public worried, and the government are in trouble. And in a bid to curb the violence, the then Director of Liquor Licensing is given instructions to reduce 3 a.m. licences. It was a clumsy policy, and the most vulnerable, our live music venues, suffered great damage. An old condition from the late 1980s was rolled out onto licence renewals, And if a venue had a 3 a.m. licence and live music, they were immediately considered high risk. This meant new CCTV requirements and 2 security guards for each show. Small gigs became untenable, and it's been reported that up to 126 venues either reduced or cancelled their live music programs, and this was within a 6-month period. Our beloved live music scene was hemorrhaging. Musicians were losing their livelihoods, and the culture of live music was under threat. The director had used a blunt instrument. There was no nuance or knowledge of live music venues, and the absurdist proxy that live music equals violence had been created. And although the Tote was the poster child of the movement, there were also venues like the Greek Deli that hosted Bouzouki nights, the Cape Lounge Jazz Club, the Lomond, where solo folk musicians performed in the front bar. These all became collateral damage. And one of my favourite little venues, the Railway Hotel. So picture a little pub in leafy Carlton where there's a nonna cooking pasta in the kitchen, old men play cards, the kids dance under grapevines, and the Brunswick Blues Shooters, who'd had a 12-year residency, and their drummer, Harold Firth, 75 years old, who formed the original Fabulous Thunderbirds in Australia, lost their residency when the owner came out one night and said he could no longer sustain live music because of the compliance costs. So we come to the Slam Rally. So people often ask us what motivated us to become live music activists. Well, 25 years ago, Quincy and I founded Bakehouse Studios. It's a recording studio in an old bakehouse down a Bluestone Lane. And our rehearsal rooms are wedged between a rail corridor and the busiest arterial road in Australia, Hoddle Street. So when we moved there, this was a classic position for musicians to go to and make a lot of noise, our rail corridors. And these have changed substantially over the last few years. So Bakehouse Richmond, it's an old rambling building, an abandoned mansion from the turn of last century. It became a kind of cubby house for Melbourne's musicians. Around 400 musicians pass through our studios per week. And we talk, we hang out, and we have a deep sense of community. I believe the place has a beating heart. So Quincy and I had no policy experience, we were novice activists. I dropped out of uni quite young. We didn't have a liquor license or any other interest except the desire to save our sector. So here's my quick how to galvanise 20,000 disparate musicians, industry and fans to come out from under their rocks and in real life march on Parliament. So number one, the movement was always about community. We didn't set out to be spokespeople. So our high-profile spokespeople were the musicians who used their voices and words to define the campaign. Ultimately, this was their cause. Number two, we simplified the complexity of liquor licensing policy to a direct message that the broader community could take up, i.e., don't kill live music. This was about our rights to participate and practice in our culture. Number three, we were inclusive with the music sector and stayed politically non-partisan. Any genre or style of music were welcome. However, we drew a clear line in the sand when it came to nightclubs, large nightclubs, sexually explicit entertainment or gambling. We disassociated ourselves from those areas of licensing. Music was always at the core. And here's where I'd like to, in comparison, I'd like to raise the recent Keep Sydney Open campaign. I don't know if many of you are aware, but there's been a blanket lockout in the King's Cross area and a big movement to try and keep their rooms open. In comparison, they lost a lot of support in their early days because they aligned themselves with the civil libertarians who were saying we have a right to drink late and we have a right to party. So at the core of their messaging, they lost the support of the media, and in turn they lost community sentiment. So their campaign has changed recently, and they now include musicians and cultural practice. So they have lost, though, 40 venues over the last year or so. And King's Cross is now called the developer's dream. And if those of you who had ever visited King's Cross, it was a very vibrant, to use a word politicians love, a very vibrant community before. So, number 4, publicists, media, event organisers. These were our people. They were in and they knew how to put on a spectacle. And can I say, through a big, mighty PA as well. And these ancillary industries would also suffer from the unintended consequences. Number 5, experts, academics, policy writers, they all love music. Even judges and top silks from the bar, they join the cause to advise us and present a sophisticated response to policy that had not been assessed for its cultural impact. Number 6, we remained independent. We were run by volunteers, and we made a firm decision not to receive any political funding, thus maintaining integrity and in turn the trust of our community. And when needed, our mean tweets can still have politicians cowering. Above all, Melbourne was and is a music city. City may have the industry, Adelaide has its festival, but Melbourne has venues, community radio and musicians. In fact, we are a hashtag city of musicians. They moved to Melbourne from all over Australia and New Zealand to be near other artists. The 1,000 or so venues that are scattered throughout the state, and primarily the audiences that have grown up with some of the best community radio in the world. The demands we presented to government at our very first meeting, including the funding and formation of a peak body for contemporary popular music, Music Victoria, and data to quantify the social, economic and cultural value of live music. These have all been signed off in subsequent years. So the Slam Rally resonated as a true expression of a generational challenge to the impact of art and contemporary music within our culture. The political and regulatory changes directly linked to our demands include world-first planning reforms, which I'm pleased to see you guys are picking up, and that will protect music, arts and cultural venues from encroaching residential development. Slam initiated an ongoing political agenda for contemporary music in Victoria and indeed Australia-wide. And live music in Melbourne and Victoria now have unprecedented support from both local and state governments, and they both boldly stated that upholding the value that music in small venues in fact mitigates violence. So what have I learnt as a live music activist? And I know I've got a tone restraint here. The day after the rally, Quincy and I naively thought we'd go back to our normal lives and the policymakers would fix everything. Wrong. I've learnt that if you pick a fight with governments and you unearth a problem, the onus is on you, the activist, the lobbyist, the advocate, to present your solutions with an evidence-based, researched and sophisticated position. We needed to see this through. I've learnt and seen the fragility of our sector and that a healthy, robust scene in Melbourne cannot be sustained if other cities and indeed rural towns can't support touring artists from lack of venues. Gigs in Melbourne are a dream for fans, a city where world-class acts can play any given night and the ticket prices are around $20 or less, or often free. Musicians rarely get remunerated properly. And our tyranny of distance in Australia and the population size means Melbourne can only be sustained as a music city if our sister cities are also strong and robust. I've learned that our artists are at the core of our community and the nucleus of our industry. In Australia, they are the working poor. Australia Council data has most musicians earning less than $11,000 per year. They're being disenfranchised from their community, and affordable housing becomes less and less attainable. Since the rally, I've continued to work in a voluntary capacity and found myself on boards, advisory committees and government roundtables. Slam went national in 2012 and we recruited activists in other states and overseeing successful campaigns, but primarily around regulatory reform. So a few years later, I thought I'd give it up. Activist fatigue, financial hardship, my kids were growing up and they needed me at home. But come 2005, I've got a place at the table. I've got the ear of government. So I used my extreme position of privilege to write to the then Minister of Justice and call for a task force to tackle sexual assault and harassment in licensed venues. I personally felt a deep moral obligation after years of championing live music venues as safe places to ensure that we came together to support our audiences and artists with the dignified and safe shows that were free from harassment. Our sector had a duty of care to our musicians. Most of all were small and micro businesses, and they're not afforded the same workplace sexual harassment protections as other workers in Australia. So this is a question to all of you. How can we truly nurture our music cities and be true in our representation of different people's voices and song if the narrative only favours straight white men? And if our venues are seen as hostile places to women, the LGBTQI+ community, and our Indigenous and First Nations people and people of colour? My ultimate goal with the work of the task force is to educate towards behavioural change. Sexual assault and harassment is a societal problem. It's insidious and it's an everyday experience for many women and marginalised people. So I've been reading about similar high-profile reported incidents in Canada and the events that led to the formation of the Venue Alliance Against Sexual Assault and action groups rising such as NASA, Noise Against Sexual Assault, Girls Against and Safer Scene. Artists like Modern Baseball and Speedy Ritz also taking action and responsible for the safety of their fans by introducing hotlines at their shows. Australian band Camp Coke recently also took up the initiative. So I'm heartened that a community response is being echoed globally. And I can imagine a new chapter in the Mastering of the Music City report, guiding policymakers on considered responses to sexual assault and harassment within venues and festivals. So in closing, I'd like to leave you with a clip that was taken at the Slam rally in a short story. On the 23rd of February, AC/DC were touring Australia, and there was a push by city officials, the music industry Illuminati, and commercial radio stations to have them recreate their famous Long Way to the Top video, where they travelled down Swanston Street on a flatbed truck. Most of the event applications had failed that day, and the insurance indemnity to make a public event like this was almost impossible at the time. So we hijacked the idea and the date, and in Australia we have a democratic right to protest and don't need a permit to exercise this right. So we procured a flatbed truck, the original filmmaker that appears with the band, you'll see him on the back of the truck again, a little older, and it even got the original bagpipe players that played with AC/DC on the truck. That day, the musicians of Melbourne took back the streets, and we felt a place in the city. We made some noise, and with the anthem of our local boys who made good, and at the same time as we marched past Town Hall, or your City Hall, the City Council endorsed their first ever live music strategy, and on to Parliament where the Live Music Accord was being drafted. It's a long way to the top.
Music
so much. And Quincy as well, thanks for making the trip from Melbourne. You can see why the story from Slam and the other work that Helen does is pretty, very impressive, and has always been such a story I wanted to be able to share here, so thank you.